Make sure you guys hit the subscribe button if you guys are enjoying the content that we're throwing up. And make sure you guys hit the like button if you enjoy the video. And yeah, let's begin. Okay, so we are picking up with the New Mutants as part of Swords of X Part 6. And this one is totally different from the video that we did with the Hellions, right? The Hellions was a lot more comedic, more of a dark humor. Actually, this is Part 7, I think, if we take into account X of Swords creation, right, is kind of what that is. Nonetheless, this one's pretty dark, right? Not really dark. This one's just a different kind of tone. But this one really picks up with it being written by Ed Brisson. Of course, you know it's going to be amazing. But this one picks up with Magic, Ileana Rasputin, basically hitting up like Cyclops and Cable and kind of telling him like, Cable, you got to grab your sword, you got to come here, we got a great big huge thing going on, you got to bring your sword, right? You know, as part of the whole Swords of X event. Basically come here, stand on your altar and get ready for the whole great big huge thing. Not a whole lot going there. The really big moment kind of comes with regards to Warlock and Doug Ramsey. Now Doug Ramsey, most of you guys are familiar with just because of our coverage of Dawn of X, right? He's the guy that can basically understand any language, and he's the one that translates for Krakoa itself whenever Krakoa wants to speak to the Quiet Council, or when the Quiet Council has a question for Krakoa or something along those lines. But Warlock is a more interesting character, right? So Warlock appeared back in 1984, and he was created by Chris Claremont and Bill Sienkiewicz, right? And the whole idea behind Warlock is that he comes from a planet that's never really identified, but the idea of the planet is that it's basically kind of a living techno-organism, right? Like the people, the denizens, its native citizens, are like living technology. And the way this works is that when parents give birth to their kids, the kids basically prove their ability to live by fighting their parents to the death. And if the kid kills their parents, the kid continues on, they have their own offspring, and the cycle continues. But for the case of Warlock, he actually rebelled against this ideology, right? He didn't really believe in fighting against anybody. And so with his father basically being the ruler of their world, he essentially fled. And of course, this led to a great big huge chase, and he eventually landed on Earth and then ended up encountering the X-Men and more or less became part of Xavier's team, or at least the New Mutants, for quite some time, right? So that's kind of the long and short explanation of him. Much like Hellions, I feel like we should do a video on him in the same way that we should do a video on Wild Child. But the idea here is that Warlock has basically been a long-time friend of the X-Men, right? And that's why Warlock refers to himself as self. He refers to Doug as like Doug friend, right? It's like a computer talking to people. He's also a little janky. If you guys remember him on like X-Men the animated series, he was a little, a little janky, a little weird. But the idea is that Doug is essentially part of the people who are supposed to fight here on Krakoa. But the problem is that he's not really a fighter, right? He's a translator, but he wants to be a fighter, right? He wants to be something more than the guy who just translates things. And that's kind of the crazy thing, is that Doug's weapon is supposed to be Warlock, right? That's kind of what his weapon is supposed to be. And Warlock basically says like, I can turn myself into a sword and we can fight together, but it's kind of crazy because initially he kind of says, well, I should use this sword and like start hacking down trees and stuff. And Krakoa's like, no, you don't either, right? And that's when Ileana Rasputin appears. And Ileana Rasputin kind of takes Doug under her wing and starts training him on how to fight. The problem with this is that Doug is not a fighter. He's never really been a fighter. That was never really his thing. He's like Sage, right? He's almost kind of like the brains behind the operation. And that's one of the biggest issues that he runs into, is that in his little bit of a kind of bout with Ileana Rasputin, he's taken down quick, fast, and in a hurry, right? He's taken down so quickly. And the response of Ileana is, you're supposed to be one of the 10 champions fighting for Earth. And the issue is that if you die out there, there's no guarantee you're going to come back the way you are. The reality is you just need to stay here, right? Like you just need to stay here. And it's one of these things where you kind of switch over to the Quiet Council and you have this kind of discussion taking place between Krakoa and Doug. And of course, basically Krakoa is talking in a language that nobody but Doug can really understand. And it's a little bit of bickering going on as the Quiet Council is, having their discussions or what have you, or seemingly a Sinister is getting ready to go on his mission, right? Go on his mission with the Hellions. But the whole gist here is that, the mission of Sinister is kind of questionable. And that's when Doug kind of asks the question, like, what happens if Sinister's mission fails? And the idea is, well, we'll explore that option when we get to it. But for right now, there's no real point in really focusing on anything else, right? Like we'll focus on those things. You just worry about being our translator. It's one of these things where even Krakoa himself is on board with the idea that Doug doesn't go, right? That Doug is basically the person who represents the voice of Krakoa on the Quiet Council, so Krakoa can be heard. He's kind of necessary in that way. But with Doug himself, he's like, the rules have been set. I was chosen to be part of the 10. I want to fight. And the idea here is that they're kind of looking at the possibility of replacing Doug with somebody else, sneaking somebody else in to take Doug's place instead of Doug actually actually being the one to fight. Now, whether or not that can be done, we don't know. And we have to believe based on the prophecy that there's a reason why Doug was chosen. Maybe there was no reason, right? Maybe it was just arbitrary. Or it was just luck of the draw. And it's Doug. He's going to be the one to fight and he's going to be the one to die, right? Like, we don't really know. But kind of continuing his training sessions with Magic, she continues to get the upper hand on him. And the reason why is because Doug's not using his powers the way he needs to. That with Ileana being so hard on him, that Krakoa initially kind of comes to the rescue, but Doug says, no, let her go. And that's one of these things where it's like Ileana is doing her best to just try to keep him alive by teaching him to be an effective fighter, because Ileana had to learn the hard way, right? When she was a little girl, she was taken to Limbo. She learned, the black arts and all that kind of stuff. She learned how to fight. She had to learn to survive. And that's really what Doug has to learn here. He has to learn how to survive. Because the truth about this is that with Doug being so important on Krakoa, in a lot of ways, he's been mollycoddled by the X-Men, right? Like, they take care of him. They make sure that he's kind of prized above almost all others because his job is to just kind of, be an interpreter. But he doesn't want to be resigned to that kind of a situation, right? And plus, it's a boring life, and that's when Ileana kind of chimes in and says, understand the stakes here, Doug. Like, this is not a small thing. When Doug's like, I really wasn't doing that bad. She's like, no, you don't understand what this is, right? Like, these are Apocalypse's children. And they literally crushed him without breaking a sweat. They killed, it's something that we as the X-Men have almost never been able to do, right? We've almost never been able to kill Apocalypse. Like, we've never been able to do that, right? All we've ever been able to do is fight him off. They were able to punch a hole in him, right? They were able to injure him in a way that we've just never been able to do. Those are the forces that we're fighting up against. And you are fumbling and bumbling, right? You don't know what you're doing. So yeah, I guess in the grand scheme of things, you didn't really do that bad. But the reality is you did terrible, right? In comparison to the people who are fighting out there. And that's true, right? Because you look at Ileana Rasputin, she's a hardcore dyed-in-the-wool fighter. You look at Storm, it's the same way. Wolverine, it's the exact same way. Then you have Cypher, right? This guy understands languages. And it's one of these things where he kind of muses to himself and says, kind of gets irritated at Ileana, right? Because she doesn't seem to believe that he understands the stakes. But he says, like, I'm putting my life on the line to save others, right? Like, that matters, doesn't it? And that's when Exodus pops up and says, it does matter, but understand, no one's going to sing songs about your life. No one's going to tell stories about it because it won't be worth telling. Your skill is language, not battle, right? That's what you're here for. You're here to interpret language. You're not here as a fighter. Why you were chosen is anybody's guess, but it's obvious to the Quiet Council, it's obvious to Ileana Rasputin, and it's obvious to you. You're not a fighter. You're not here to fight. And it's one of these things where Exodus says, maybe there's some kind of a loophole, right? Maybe there's something that we can do. If Sinister's plan fails, when his plan fails, maybe there's something we can do where we can switch you out with somebody else, right? If Bene du Paris was given the sword, right? If Exodus was the one who was going to fight, he would probably win, right? And he would probably do better than anybody else, right? Keep in mind, Exodus is an Omega level telepath. This guy is hugely powerful. The world shakes with the kind of power this guy possesses, right? It's kind of nuts. But at the end of the day, the stance is Doug was chosen. Doug has to be the one to fight, right? Doug has to be the one to engage in this conflict. And so when he's back in his quarters, he's met by really Mondo kind of taken over by Krakoa, and Krakoa tries to reiterate it again, right? Like, there must be a way to send somebody else in your place. The whole world's against him, right? Like, the whole world is against Doug. No one believes he can succeed. And the reality of this is that can be disheartening, but there's also something just great about standing in the face of everyone who told you that you couldn't, and then you do, right? There's just something about proving them all wrong. And even if they don't admit it, knowing that they know they have egg on their face, knowing that they know that they were foolish to question you, they were foolish to tell you that it couldn't be done. And that's what's so cool about that, because that's the relatable thing, right? Like with Comics Explained, I ran into that, right? Like, I ran into people who told me, you can't do that, right? You can't be a full-time YouTuber. There's no way you can succeed at that. And look where I am now, right? And they're stuck with egg on their face, looking like buffoons. They were foolish enough to question me. And there's a great kind of empowerment that comes with that. And I would say this really kind of proves to be the turning point of Doug Ramsey, because he just kind of breaks and he's like, I've had enough, right? I can't run, I can't hide. This is the responsibility that's been bestowed on me. I'm scared out of my wits, right? Like, you have to understand, I'm terrified. I know that I might not come back. I know that I may die out there, and if they resurrect me, I won't come back as a person that I was before. I'll lose all my powers, or I'll come back twisted and evil. I have no real idea. But understand, this is my responsibility. And that's usually what it takes, right? It takes this idea of people having a thing that they want to achieve and being met with adversity and every conceivable way, right? Sometimes this adversity is in your own head, right? It's your fear, it's your anxiety, it's your nerves, it's your depression, it's any number of things that are constantly just bumping up against you and telling you it can't be done. There's no way it can be done. If you could have done it, you would have done it by now, right? Like all this negativity that feeds into you. And then when it comes from the outside, people who are telling you you're making every mistake, you're not doing this, you're not doing that, you're screwing up, then it all kind of, it's like boiling over. And then something just snaps and it just turns into, I can't. And then it's just a matter of, I don't care what anybody else has to say. The voices get silent and it's just this pure determination. That's what you're left with. The desire not to prove to them, but to prove to yourself that you can actually do it. And that's what happens, right? Doug goes into his training session with Illyana Rasputin, and he by no means comes out as like a world-class swordsman, but he starts using his power. He's countering every move she's making. He's making all the right moves, and he's saying, because I look at you, Illyana Rasputin, and your moves are a language. I understand what you're going to do. I can predict what you're going to do before you do it. I can read you. The way you move, how you fight, your style, it's no different than understanding French or English or Spanish. It's just in this instance, I'm understanding swordsmanship. I'm learning the language of fencing. And because he's able to pick up on it so fast, his skill starts to increase at an almost exponential rate. And one of the first things he picks up on with Illyana is, you're letting me win. You're holding me back. Why are you doing this? Why are you holding back like this? And she says, you know, you have the potential to use your powers to overcome anybody that you fight, because you're like Taskmaster, right? Like you will learn to fight like them, and you'll learn to understand how they fight as you fight, right? You'll be able to overcome them. And so as that time, you know, when that progresses, one thing that I'm afraid of, and one thing that concerns me, and believe me when I tell you this, that if you raise your sword to fight anybody on Otherworld, it'll be the last thing that you do, that there's nothing you can do to stop it. In essence, that while he is making progress and he is getting better, he's still ill-equipped to face off against the forces that are out there, to face off against those various threats. So again, still a little bit of opposition there, but if I'm a betting man, if I'm being honest with you guys, which I feel like as often as I say that, I'm a betting man, then I would say this will come down to Doug Ramsey. Like it'll come down to Cypher. It'll come down to him basically being the one who will most likely come out on top and save the day. If he doesn't, then Krakoa's kind of screwed. But at the moment, we are 4 swords captured, 5 if we include Cable. We've got 4 or 5 more to go. So with that being said, guys, we're gonna bring this video to an end. If you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and I will catch you all later. Peace.